The R&D tax credit is a credit meant to incentivize U.S. companies for doing R&D activities here in the U.S. What we see quite a bit is some confusion. We generally don't deal with tax folks. We generally are dealing with more the accounting side of the house. There's some confusion because for U.S. GAAP purposes, there's something called, capitalization of internal use software or capitalized software development costs. For US GAAP, generally you have to capitalize costs once you reach technological feasibility, and then those costs become an amortization expense in the future. For tax purposes, the definition of R&D is quite different. We start from day one of the R&D experience and claim expenses all the way up through and past technological feasibility. There's a 4-part test that has to be met. So normally what an R&D credit study does is you talk to the engineers, whoever's kind of performing the R&D, and you break down, what your R&D department's doing into various projects. Then for each project, you will qualify those projects based on the 4-part test, which is the R&D activity has to be technological in nature. The R&D has to be performed for what they call a permitted purpose. It has to eliminate uncertainty, and then there has to be an actual process of experimentation. So those are kind of the 4-part tests. We talk to people and kind of document how a project does or does not qualify for that 4-part test. To the extent it qualifies for the 4-part test, there are 3 types of expenses that you're allowed to claim for the R&D tax credit. So those are your qualified research expenditures. The first one of those is wages. So you just take box 1, W-2 wages. The second one is independent contractors. So to the extent you're using or subcontracting some of the R&D to an independent contractor, you are able to claim those expenses, but you only get 65% of those expenses. And the third item is supplies. And those are supplies actually consumed in the R&D process. So for instance, a software company is probably not going to have many supplies, not a whole lot consumed in the actual R&D process. Whereas if you think about pharmaceutical, when you are actually doing research for a molecule, a lot of times you're using various agents or reagents, which are actually consumed in the actual process of R&D. So those would be types of supplies that would qualify. All the expenses have to be in the U.S. So either wages in the U.S. or the contractors in the U.S., supplies in the U.S. You can have some other types of credits, which we have done in the past, namely orphan drug credits. And it's not because, drugs for orphans, orphan children. An orphan drug is a drug that is being made for an extremely small percentage of the population. And because of that, it's extremely difficult for a U.S. company to get a sample size large enough in the U.S. So often you have to go on a global basis to get an accurate sample size for like your clinical testing and things of that nature. So that's kind of the only nuance I know of where you can actually include foreign expenses within a credit, but that's specifically for the orphan drug tax credit.